The story I wanted to tell you this time was about my neighbor. His name was Lu Fang. However, we usually didn't get along well with him. One day, while my friend and I were walking on the street, my friend told me that Lu Fang was following us. I told him to ignore him and urged him to go faster. But we couldn't stand the smell of Lu Fang. No one wanted to play with him. Lu Fang's family condition was not very good. He looked a bit malnourished and his clothes were also very shabby. Although Lu Fang's house was next to mine, I didn't make friends with him for this reason. Lu Fang's house was full of paper people and paper horses all over the house. It looked so weird. In front of Lu Fang's house there was also a round wreath of flowers to invite business. It was not just Lu Fang who looked annoyed but also his mother. In the countryside at that time, almost every family kept a few chickens and pigs, and sometimes they could not avoid diseases and they would die. When pets die of disease, people often throw them in the river. When Lu Fang's mother saw someone dump an animal carcass, she would bring it home to clean it and eat it. We all guessed Lu Fang's strange body odor because of eating too many sick animals. His mother also rarely interacted with people in the village. She had a very odd temperament, so the family's paper business was not doing very well. Every time we see Lu Fang's mother, we shied away and couldn't figure out why we were so afraid of her. Once, I was walking home alone and passed in front of Lu Fang's house. I heard a commotion in his yard. If it was someone else's house, I might not care, but Lu Fang's house was different because I had never seen anyone visit his house. The noise from his yard intrigued me. I listened and wanted to go in and see. I tiptoed to Lu Fang's front door, put my ear to the door and listened to the movement in the courtyard. Beside Lu Fang's voice, I heard the voice of a girl in the yard. This thing piqued my curiosity even more. I mustered up my courage and was about to push the door open to see who was inside. I gently pushed open the door to reveal an opening and peered into the courtyard. I guessed it could be a sneaking relationship. I could feel my heart beating faster. Since the opening was not too big, I could only see a part of the courtyard. I saw Lu Fang playing ball with that girl very happily. I had rarely seen him smile so happily before. But no matter how I changed my perspective, I couldn't see the girl. The less I saw, the more worried I was because I didn't know if something shady happened here. As I was looking at the yard with my full attention, a hand suddenly was placed on my shoulder. The sudden hand almost scared the hell out of me. It was Lu Fang's mother. She yelled at me with fierce eyes and asked what I was doing in front of her house. I was so scared. Lu Fang's mother's screams made me tremble so much that my legs went limp. I sat down on the ground. Lu Fang's mother asked if I wanted to steal something from her house. She thought I was stealing things from her house, while Lu Fang's house was poor. There was nothing worth stealing. The moment she didn't notice, I immediately escaped. As I ran, I screamed in terror at what had just happened before my eyes. It was horrible. That night, I dreamt that Lu Fang's mother was chasing me. The next day after school, I told my friend about it. He laughed at me for being shy. I didn't want to let the story go. I asked my friend that night we would go to Lu Fang's house together to see which girl was playing with him. I didn't wait for my friend to agree or disagree, but I decided on this. I returned home to eat a hasty dinner, then ran to Lu Fang's door. I hid in the corner and stared at his house. My friend also came soon after. During the 2 hours we watched, no one entered Lu Fang's house. But when I was talking to my friend, there was a noise in Lu Fang's yard. I asked my friend if he could hear a girl's voice in the yard. My friend also listened carefully. In the yard, a girl was playing with Lu Fang. The two of them seemed to have had a lot of fun playing together. Their laughter seemed to tear the cold air. My friend suggested going inside to see who the girl was in the yard, but I disagreed. I was still afraid of being discovered by Lu Fang's fierce mother like yesterday. We hid in the corner and looked in. When it got dark, my friend got bored and wanted to leave. I stopped him. I waited patiently for a while, and then I heard the sound of clack, 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 clack. Someone was opening the door. I saw a girl with a red face walking out of Lu Fang's house. We didn't know if the girl was from this village or not, because she looked strange. At first, I thought someone was visiting Lu Fang. Because we wanted to know what had happened, we followed her and tried to see who she would meet. My friend and I followed her out of the village when it was dark. The friend was a bit scared, so he didn't want to follow anymore and wanted to go home. I ignored him and continued to follow the girl. I knew it was getting dark and it was dangerous to go back to the village. He didn't dare to go back alone, so he could only go on with me. I also convinced him and we talked. He pointed forward and said that the girl had gone into the forest. I saw that the girl had left the road and entered a forest on the side of the road. My friend and I ran into the forest as fast as we could for fear of losing track of that girl, because if we lost track, it seemed like we wasted all night. But when we ran into the forest, the girl was gone. While I was about to find her, I suddenly panicked at the scene before me. I was so scared that I stepped back and bumped into my friend. He was also taken aback by my actions, his voice trembling as he asked me what was wrong. At that time, we also discovered that we were chasing the girl to the cemetery. My friend burst into tears and wanted to go home immediately. I felt awe at the scene in front of me too. Just as we were about to turn around and wanted to run back, we bumped into something behind us and made a noise. In the dark and silent graveyard, the sound almost made me pee my pants. This sight made my legs weak. I didn't know when a paperman figure was placed behind us. A paperman was standing in front of us. We reassured ourselves by assuming that the wind had blown this paperman here. My friend was so scared that he cried and turned to run home. I didn't dare to stay alone, so I followed him out of the cemetery. As I ran out of the graveyard, I looked at the paperman again. This paper person looked very similar to the girl who walked out of Lu Fang's house. After many times of fear, I did not dare to continue to find out who was playing with Lu Fang. Every time I passed his house, I could still hear the noise in the yard. I didn't have the guts to find it anymore. This story occurred in Yongchun Village, Jidong Province, Jixi City, Heilongjiang Province. In the village, there was a gambler named Cao. Despite being in his 30s, he had no family because he was a gambler. That day, Cao went out early in the morning, and his old blind mother knew he was gambling again, so she tried to advise her son to give up, find a soulmate, and then build a family in order to have a decent life. But he refused to be obedient to stay at home, instead rushing out the gate without even looking back, leaving the old mother sighing behind. After leaving the house, Cao went straight to Mr. Lee's house at the end of the village to the east, because Mr. Lee's family owned a gambling establishment in this village that was open all year round. As Cao approached Mr. Lee's front door, he became wary because there was a big man standing there, guarding the door for the casino. Despite his concerns, Cao gritted his teeth and approached him. He always looked down on Cao and had a hostile attitude whenever he saw Cao, because Cao craved to gamble while he even had no money. When he heard Cao said that he got rich, he didn't believe Cao because everyone knew Cao didn't have a job, his family was farmers, and he had no income at all. His predictions was correct, because Cao did not just come here to play cards, but rather to play cards with them. When Cao asked, "Isn't this a place where you make money?" he replied, "You are such a jerk. The pig that your mother worked so hard to raise, you even took it out as collateral. Nonetheless, he opened the door and let Carl in. Carl entered the room. The air smelled of cigarette smoke and the sound of gamblers arguing made the scene here very lively. When the people at the mahjong table saw Carl walk in, they all came to a halt, considering that Carl wasn't allowed to play because he didn't have any money. So, when they saw Carl, they all said empathically, "If you don't have money, get out as soon as possible, otherwise everyone here will teach you a lesson." Carl said he would bet with the family's fat pig. He was confident, his face was somewhat smug, and Carl sat down at the mahjong table. Zing was the man in charge of this bet. After hearing Carl, he immediately summoned Carl to another table to write a loan bill. Zing claimed that mortgaging the pig at home would allow him to borrow 1,000 won. That man did a lot of this kind of thing, and the loan bill was written quickly, urging Carl to sign it, then giving him 1,000 won. Carl signed and returned the bill to Zing. Zing glanced at it a few times, and when he saw no problems, he allowed Carl to come to the table and began gambling. They were playing mahjong, and it quickly became clear. The rules were simple. Everyone got 2 cards, and the winner was considered on the number of points they received. Carl lost a few games in a row and started to be nervous. Since his opponent Zing was constantly winning cards, Carl had no chance of knowing that the other 2 people at the table were also Zing's people. It would be strange if Carl won. After a few rounds, Carl's 1,000 won of selling his pig left him with only 400 won in his hand. The more he played, the more he lost. Carl continued to play until the afternoon, and the remaining 400 won were also lost. When Zing realized Carl had spent all of his money, he put his hand on Carl's shoulder and asked him to take his men home to catch the pig. Then it was the doorman's turn. Before leaving, Zing told him not to let Carl escape on the way. The guard nodded and pushed Carl out. He threatened Carl that if he tried to flee, he would cut off his legs and make him trudge home. "You deserve this because of being obsessed with the gambling," he said. When they arrived at the house gate, Carl refused to enter, instead telling them he would stand outside the gate and let them in to catch the pig. The doorman considered Carl's attitude and then agreed so as not to embarrass him. Carl looked at those men walking into the yard and quickly hid in the opposite corner. He didn't want to see his elderly mother sad. Hearing the screams of the doorman and the others in the yard, as well as his old mother's bitter pleas, he felt remorse and blamed himself. Finally, after witnessing those people beating the old mother and driving the pigs out, he couldn't return home and face the old mother again. Carl couldn't even remember how many times he vowed never to gamble again, but when he saw the blind old mother at home and thought about his behavior, he burst into tears. He dashed out of the village and came across a dilapidated house. He curled up in the wall's corner. It was getting dark by this time. Carl dozed off. Carl didn't know how long he'd been sleeping when he heard someone talking to him. A voice from behind a shattered wall asked him for fire to smoke. Carl dozed off. He didn't want to talk to that person. He said in a dream that he didn't smoke. Carl felt a chill as he turned to go back to sleep. The house was dilapidated and he was outside the village. It was late. How could anyone come here to lend him fire? Carl sensed that something was wrong when he heard voices outside the wall saying, "Let's go gambling." When these words were said, Carl suspected that this person was not normal. Before Carl could even raise his head to look, a figure appeared from beneath the crumbling wall. Carl was terrified when he looked at the man. The man's face was a large blood hole and he was getting close to Carl's face. Carl was so terrified that he peed his pants. His legs were weak. He wanted to run but couldn't get up. He could only sit on the ground, panting for help, but couldn't speak. As the man stretched his head forward again, Carl noticed many sharp teeth emerging from the red hole on his face, which had no feature of a human face. He suggested gambling with Carl again. If Carl won, he would give him a large sum of money. If Carl lost, he would shave his face. A cold voice resounded, and Carl's heart was filled with fear. Carl was so terrified that he couldn't say no and could only nod his head in a cold sweat. When he saw Carl agree, he took out a few gold nuggets and placed them on the dirty wall, declaring that this was his bet. At the same time, he pulled out a mahjong set. After that, he placed the mahjong set on the filthy wall. Carl stared at the deck of cards in front of him, his heart racing, and he did not dare to reach out and take it for the first time. Following the drawing of the card, the man repeatedly urged Carl to draw the card quickly. Carl did not dare to resist, so he could only tremulously pull out his hand. Carl's body was shivering, holding two cards in his hand, but he didn't have the courage to look at them, so he just held them in his hand. The man appeared impatient, so he asked Carl to open the card. Despite his repeated urgings, Carl did not dare to open the cards and could only throw out two cards in his palm. When Carl closed his eyes and heard the man say that he got an earth card, he thought the game was over. He had never drawn a card larger than the ground card since he began playing this game. When Carl closed his eyes and covered his ears, he could hear the crunching sound of cards falling on the brick wall, similar to the sound of a life test. Immediately after Carl's card fell, he heard someone howl, "I really lost!" His words were filled with unbelievable tones, as if he couldn't lose. Carl reasoned that if his opponent lost a card, he would be ashamed to commit suicide, so he closed his eyes and waited for a long time, only hearing the wind whistling in his ears. Carl quietly opened his eyes, looked around and saw that the person had vanished. At this point, his heart seemed to be reviving. He thought he was having a dream, but when Carl turned around, he saw a deck of cards and some gold bars on the wall. Only then did he realize that the card he'd selected was the largest deck in mahjong, the Earth card. Carl couldn't hold back his tears as he realized God had saved his life and given him a second chance. Carl returned home with some gold nuggets. He never gambled again, sold the gold nuggets for startup capital, and Carl's family's life gradually improved. This story happened in Longan District, Huludao City, Liaoning Province on December 10, 2015. I was working at a harbor there at the time. My colleagues and I lived together in a dormitory not far from the harbor. There was an abandoned building next to our dormitory. One day, the three of us had a little drink after work. Yin, the bravest of the three, came up with the idea that we would explore the abandoned building. He said that the abandoned building used to be the office of a large company. Normally, we would object, but because we were drunk that day, the ghost somehow made the two of us follow Yin. But when we got there, we both regretted it. If the building looked somber during the day, it was even scarier at night. Another colleague of mine was Sam, who was not very big but very brave. Sam wanted us to go back, however, despite Yin's ridicule and irony that Sam was a coward, Sam still decided to continue, and I didn't have any opinions of my own. Although I was a little scared, I didn't fall far behind when the two of them were walking. After entering the abandoned building, we realized that there was indeed a fire before, and there were traces of smoke everywhere. It was very dark inside the house. We relied on the light from the mobile phone in Yin's hand to shine, looked at some of the rooms inside, but were quite disappointed. The rooms were empty. They seemed to have been cleaned up after the fire, but nothing was left. At this point, we decided to go out. Yin was thinking about something. He saw several houses in front of him that did not appear to be on fire. He also saw some items that were kept and asked to check them out. There were indeed some things in the rooms, but they were all shabby furniture. They hadn't been used in years. There was a smaller corridor in front of some rooms. We decided to go down that road. Sam convinced us to come back, but Yin ignored him, and Sam didn't dare to go out alone, so he had to follow. At the door of a room, Yin suddenly stopped as if something inside caught his attention. Sam and I followed Yin together and looked inside. We saw a person in the corner sleeping with a tattered duvet, looking like a homeless person. But slowly we all discovered something was wrong. The person didn't show any reaction, especially the bare feet with a dead grey color. Yin felt curious and wanted to go ahead and see if the person was alive or dead. "I'll see if the person is dead or not," Yin said. "Don't be so crazy," I tried to stop him. We both convinced Yin not to check that person because we might get in trouble, but Yin had a very stubborn character. The more we tried to stop him, the more he wanted to do it. Finally, he stepped forward and opened the tattered duvet. This moment made our hearts feel like jumping out because no one knew if it was a corpse or a living person. But as soon as the duvet was opened, we were all scared. It was a dead wanderer. The body was rotting. It could be seen that he had been dead for some time. His skin was dry and disfigured. Seeing the horrible appearance of the corpse, Sam went to the back and vomited in disgust. I also hid far away, not daring to look directly. But Yin was brave, not afraid at all, mocking us for cowardice. Not only did he not leave, he even ran to the corpse and asked Sam to take a photo of him with the corpse. At first, Sam disagreed, but seeing Yin's appearance as if he wouldn't leave, he didn't take a photo. Sam had no choice but to take a photo for him. Yin didn't stop, and he asked to take a few more pictures before leaving in the end. Yin was completely satisfied, and we hurried back to the dormitory. Honestly, when I arrived there I wasn't so scared, but now that I knew there was a dead man in the building behind our dormitory, I was so scared. The way back became very scary. I always felt that there were ghosts following me. Fortunately, we all made it home safely. The thrilling adventure of the night had ended safely. After the horrible night last night, we all went to work as usual. At noon, Sam suddenly panicked and ran into my office with a panicked face. He said that Yin didn't come to work this morning. His phone was unreachable. Yin was keeping a piece of material that Sam was in urgent need of right now. Sam was very thoughtful, feeling that this must have been something to do with what happened last night. He asked me to go with him to the abandoned building. Ever since we saw the dead man last night, we had been terrified of this abandoned building, but I found Yin and it was daytime, so we still dared to come here. Following memory, we followed the path we took last night and began to look for Yin. Honestly, I didn't know why. Even during the day, this building looked so dark and spooky. The two of us took the road that we went on last night. Soon we reached the dead wanderer room and we looked inside, trembling. We immediately saw the tattered duvet covering the dead, but we also realized that it was different from last night. The overhanging shape of the duvet obviously didn't cover one more person, and a bad premonition arose in both of us. Although Sam was very scared, he and Yin were both from the same hometown and knew each other before. He was worried about Yin, so he dared to remove the torn tattered duvet. But as soon as we opened it, we were both completely dumbfounded. Sure enough, Yin was already dead under the duvet. He died next to the rotting corpse of the Wanderer. No one knew why Yin came here or how he died. Sam and I couldn't imagine anything anymore. Later, the police came to handle the body and concluded that Yin died of sudden heart failure, but Sam and I understood that Yin's death stemmed from a lack of respect for the deceased. This story happened to me about 3 years ago. At that time, after graduating from university, I got a pretty good job in the city. I also rented a small apartment near the company for convenience on the way to work. Everything was going well until I kept having the same very increasingly terrifying dream. In my dream, I saw myself going to a very dark place, not to see anything around. At that time, in front of me began to appear an extremely attractive white light. During the dream, my body felt very constricted, unable to naturally control as usual. That flash of light began to absorb my body like a powerful storm, making me unable to resist. At first, the dream was not clear, but later it became more and more stressful. Finally, in that light appeared a person whose face was very similar to mine. He had only half of his upper body and one arm that looked very scary. I tried weakly to push him away, but to no avail. He looked at me with dark eyes and a sly smile and said strange words. He wanted me to return this body and would get it soon. I tried to dodge, but he reached out his hand to catch me. My body still couldn't control itself. I kept asking who he was, but all I got in return was his savage laughter. He rushed at me, clung to me, then continued to say that he would take back everything that belonged to him. I panicked and pushed him away with all my might. I was startled to wake up, but the feeling of being held by him remained intact and did not disappear. That feeling was real, not just an ordinary nightmare. Sweat drenched my whole body. This day was the 20th day in a row that I dreamt of that terrifying man. I panicked and screamed in my dream. When I woke up, I was extremely thirsty and had a sore throat. I decided to go to the kitchen to get a drink. The glass of cold water that ran down my throat made my whole body feel a little bit lighter. I started thinking about that dream. Back in bed, I didn't dare to go back to sleep even though it was just past 3 o'clock in the morning. I knew for sure that if I went back to sleep, I would continue to dream. I was afraid that maybe I had some serious illness. That whole night, I couldn't sleep well. As soon as it was morning, I quickly left the house to go to the hospital. I hoped that the doctor would find a way to help me. At the hospital, I signed up for a general checkup of the whole body, and to my surprise, the doctor said that I was completely healthy, without any symptoms of any disease. Then I told the doctor about my dreams. He thought I was having a psychological problem, so he referred to me to a private psychotherapist. I immediately followed that given address to the doctor's house. Thanks to the referral, I didn't need to make an appointment or make an appointment in advance. Inside the house, we sat across from each other. The doctor began to ask me about my situation. I also very seriously told the story that I was having. Then the doctor also gave me a lot of advice. But the following nights, I continued to dream. The scary man chased after me, demanding my body, making it impossible for me to sleep well. I still continued to find a psychiatrist to talk about my problems, but after a few treatments, there was still no improvement, so the doctor had to give up. So I had to go back, thinking about my problem while walking. Maybe I had to accept that. Because I didn't get enough sleep, even seriously lacking sleep, my body was always in a lethargic state. My work was also stagnant, causing my boss to scold me and affect my work a lot. That day, I left with a colleague. I also told him my story because the two of us are also relatively close in the company. After hearing everything, he suggested that I see a shaman. He thought this may be related to spiritual issues, but I thought those people were just scammers. I was not originally the type of person who believes in ghosts, so I didn't even agree about going to a shaman. That night, I had a dream as soon as I took a nap, but this time it was strange that I could completely control my body and my thoughts. But everything was still the same. It was still a very dark space that couldn't see anything around and couldn't see the other man, so I tried to run away. Suddenly my body felt extremely heavy. I looked back and saw that the man had been clinging to my back ever since. This time he didn't keep his distance to talk to me like before. His voice rang out. He said it was time for me to disappear to give him my body. I wouldn't be able to escape. Panicked, I used all my strength to pull him out of my body. His body clung to me just as he said that I was about to disappear from this body. It was difficult for me to break free from his grasp. It also hurt my hand from his clinging. He still didn't show any anger, but in return he gave a scary smile and said that my body was his own sooner or later, so he wouldn't rush to wait until the time was right. Although scared, I still tried to ask who he was, why he was clinging and wanting to harm me like that. After that, I also warned him to stay away from me. Otherwise, I decided not to stand still and wait to die. But he didn't seem to mind my threats. He revealed his true form with a mouth wide to ear and black eyes. He said that what belonged to him came back to him and then disappeared. I woke up. It was already morning. As always, I was so tired that I couldn't breathe. The feeling was still as intact as in a dream. I felt my hand hurt. After looking back, the bruise was still there. It was clear that everything happened, not a dream. At this point, I understood that the doctors in the hospital could not help me. What I needed was something spiritual. I immediately took out my phone and contacted a colleague. I remembered the shaman he introduced. Although I didn't trust spirituality very much, this was probably my last hope. When I mentioned it, my colleague thought I was making fun of him, because just the other day I said many bad things about this shaman. After listening to my explanation, my colleague also believed I wanted to see that shaman, so he was very excited. He immediately gave me an appointment. After work, they would meet there and go to the shaman together. I was so impatient that I arrived at the appointment earlier than planned. But when I got there, I also saw a colleague who had been there before. Maybe he's also interested in my story. Along the way, he also introduced a lot about the shaman. It seemed that he took the shaman very seriously. Arriving at the place, the colleague also advised me a few things before entering. After having said that, he went to knock on the door and called the shaman. It seemed that he was very familiar with the place. An older man with no hair on his head and a cheerful face opened the door for us. He greeted his colleague enthusiastically. After that, the colleague quickly told the shaman about my story and hoped that he could help. The shaman looked at me. The atmosphere became silent. I did not know what he was doing, only seeing him looking at me for a long time. Then he said that the grudge had existed since before birth. This thing was inevitable because the resentment was too great. I was still bewildered. I didn't understand what was going on and didn't know what to say. My colleague asked the shaman on my behalf again. The shaman said that maybe I didn't know about my twin brother when I was still in the womb, but my mother could only keep my brother or me, and she chose me. When I heard that, I was surprised because I had never heard my mother talk about this. The shaman added that my twin brother was the one I had seen in my dream. At this point, my head suddenly hurt so bad. Maybe what the shaman said was true. That was why my body reacted so violently. Perhaps that the twin brother was also very distressed and deeply resentful of me. That also made me extremely self-blame. Seeing this, the shaman also comforted me. He said it was not my fault and that this choice was a must for my mother to make. I did not want to harm my brother, so I asked the shaman to help him without hurting him. The shaman then took out 2 talismans and gave them to my colleague and me. He told us to put it on. It would protect us. Next, the shaman clapped his hands together, muttering some incantation. Gradually in front of me, the man I met in my dream also appeared. It seemed that the shaman wanted to talk to him. The shaman wanted to let him understand that the previous choice had nothing to do with me and should not hold such hatred, but the man disagreed about it. The shaman was still very patient, continued to explain to him, and hoped that he would transcend reincarnation. But he became angry. He looked straight at me and asked if I was thinking about gratitude. Why I did not give him my body, but use a shaman? Obviously, I wanted to erase him again. His question was so direct that I didn't know how to answer for a moment. In the end, the more he spoke, the angrier he became, and he assumed we wanted to kill him again. So he immediately rushed towards me, wanting to take over my body. Of course, the shaman didn't give him that chance. The shaman flew over and dealt him a blow. His face has become disfigured, very ferocious like evil spirits, not the shape I still saw. He still couldn't figure out what he did wrong. He just wanted to be alive. Without saying much more, the shaman took a small vase. He began to perform strange movements and chanted mantras. Immediately, my brother's soul was sucked into a small vase without being able to resist. The shaman closed the vase's mouth, his face a little sad. I hope the shaman didn't hurt my brother because I owe him too much. The shaman told me to rest assured because he will find a way to reincarnate my brother into a member of another good family. That thing made me feel more secure. Since then, I no longer dreamt of him, but in my heart, I still had a lot of guilt about my twin brother. This story I heard from my old friend Kaleem. The story may sound a bit ridiculous, but he firmly asserts that the story was true. At that time, Kaleem was unemployed and was thinking of opening a small restaurant. That day, while Kaleem was taking a walk, he suddenly discovered a small alley with glimmering yellow lights. Kaleem decided to go inside to take a look and discover a small restaurant. It looked old and had only one sign in front. Curious, Kaleem went inside to check it out. Different from the old appearance, the inside was extremely busy. Many people were also eating here. So Kaleem came to the table and ordered a few dishes. They seemed to be the signature dish of the restaurant. Among them was the sweet and sour young ribs of the restaurant. Just taking the first bite, Kaleem was extremely surprised by the special taste of ribs. Tender ribs melt in his mouth, sweet and sour spices were tasty. After eating and drinking, Kaleem thought that the bill would be high because these dishes were delicious and plentiful, and Kaleem also ordered quite a few. But when the owner brought the bill, He was surprised because the price was very cheap. So, from then on, Kaleem used to come to this restaurant every day. Kaleem also noticed whenever he went to the restaurant, Kaleem saw many regular customers like him. Only strangely, they looked very similar. Everyone was fat. Perhaps only Kaleem was the slimmest in the restaurant. Because he often came to eat, the restaurant's owner also greeted him. The owner of the restaurant was also chubby. That day, Kaleem also came up and ordered the restaurant's signature ribs. It seemed that Kaleem also gradually became addicted to this dish without knowing it. The owner's wife also greeted Kaleem and asked if the meal was good or not. In his mind at that time, Kaleem also began to have ideas for his restaurant. Kaleem suddenly told the owner's wife that this dish was so delicious it would be a waste to sell it in this cramped alley. So Kaleem wanted to buy the dish's recipe. He also made it clear to the owner that he just bought it under the form of a franchise, not intending to appropriate this recipe. The owner's wife immediately expressed displeasure. She said that the whole family, young and old, relied on this restaurant. If the recipe was spread like that, it would no longer be exclusive and the number of customers would no longer be the only one here, which would affect the restaurant's revenue. As soon as he heard that, Kaleem immediately stood up, holding his stomach with one hand, showing a painful expression, and told the restaurant's owner's wife that his stomach was suddenly very painful. He asked her to pack the leftovers on the table to take home. Because Kaleem knew that this restaurant only sold food at the restaurant, not takeaway, Kaleem could only say that he had a severe stomach ache. Seeing that, the owner's wife did not say anything, hurriedly went to find a box to pack for Kaleem to bring home. As soon as she turned away, Kaleem revealed a proud smile because he had accomplished his plan. A few minutes later, the owner's wife also packed all the food for Kaleem and even wished him a good meal. Kaleem also acted as normal, as if he had a stomach ache, not like he was pretending. But as soon as he left the restaurant, Kaleem immediately took out his phone and called an acquaintance. That person was a friend of Kaleem and was working in the food industry, so he was very experienced. It turned out that Kaleem wanted to ask that friend to help him taste the dish to find out what the ingredients for the sweet and sour ribs were and would use the recipe for Kaleem's restaurant. Although Kaleem's friend was an experienced person in the culinary industry, after tasting it, he was also very thoughtful because the ingredients were not too difficult, but the type of meat to make it, he couldn't know. After that, Kaleem's friend began to try cooking again according to what he felt, but no matter how many times he made it, he still couldn't get the taste out. The two also discussed a lot with each other, not understanding why. Kaleem's friend also said that the type of meat used in the preparation was important. If he couldn't find the right kind, he couldn't make the right taste of that restaurant. So his friend had to give up and say goodbye to Kaleem. Feeling frustrated in his body, Kaleem also went out for a walk thinking about those ribs as he walked. Kaleem still couldn't understand that his friend, an experienced chef, couldn't guess what kind of meat it was. So lost in thought, Kaleem wandered around the alleys from afternoon until late at night without realizing it. The surrounding streets and houses also began to lit up. Reshaping, Kaleem found himself coming to a small alley with no street lights and deserted. Struggling to turn back, Kaleem suddenly tripped on something on the ground, causing him to fall forward. The fall made Kaleem's whole body dirty. His face also hit the ground, causing him pain. Kaleem rubbed his face with his hand, then glanced behind him to see what he had tripped on. As soon as Kaleem looked back, he saw a man sitting on the ground with torn clothes. It seemed Kaleem tripped on that person's foot and fell like that. Closer, Kaleem saw that it was the man about Kaleem's age. He appeared to be homeless. Kaleem felt that being unemployed like him was a bad thing, but there were still people in worse situations than him. Kaleem felt very pitiful, so he went to ask the friend. The man did not respond to a word of Khalim, but immediately closed his eyes and fell asleep when Khalim approached to talk. Khalim felt a little strange and sad because his greeting was not answered, but thinking for a moment, he did not mind any more. Khalim thought that maybe he was tired. It was so cold, and his clothes were all torn. Therefore, Khalim took off his coat and put it on him, hoping to help the man. After that, Khalim quickly returned because it was getting darker and colder. He did not know where he was, and the road was strange. Walking for a while, suddenly Khalim saw ahead of him an empty field, overgrown with grass, and the scary thing was that all around were tombstones. Amid those tombstones, Khalim glimpsed two figures digging for something stealthily. Seeing this, Khalim also quickly retreated. He intended to run away because if two people were doing stealthy things, it might be a bad thing. If he was discovered, Khalim could be in trouble, but inadvertently Khalim stepped on a dry branch. That immediately attracted the attention of those two figures. Under the dim moonlight, the figures of those two people also appeared. They were the owner of the other restaurant and his wife. But Khalim did not have time to see their faces clearly, and when he heard them ask, he panicked and ran away. Seeing no one chasing, Khalim was somewhat relieved but still closed his eyes and ran, just wanting to get out of this dark alley as quickly as possible. Running away from there, Khalim was calmer and more secure. He slowed down to rest. Khalim must have started to feel hungry due to putting all his strength into running, so unknowingly Khalim went to the other restaurant without knowing that danger awaited him there. Entering the restaurant, Khalim still ordered his familiar ribs. The owner's wife still came out to greet him as usual. Khalim was completely oblivious, so he was still greeting her. But unlike every other day, her smile became evil. She even said weird things like this would be Khalim's last meal. When she left, and Khalim also began to feel strange, but he was originally unable to see the faces of the other two shadows, so he didn't know anything and continued to eat because he was too hungry. As soon as Khalim took his chopsticks to eat, the owner's wife also began to approach and stand behind him. While Khalim didn't notice, she took a stick and hit Khalim hard on the back of the head, making him unable to react. Khalim immediately fainted on the dining table. The customers sitting around also did not react to the action of the owner's wife. Khalim didn't know how long he passed out, but when Khalim woke up, he found himself tied to a log. Looking around, Khalim was more surprised because this was the empty land he had just seen at night. Before he could figure out what was happening, Khalim saw the restaurant's owner standing in front of him. The owner's wife said she was supposed to make Khalim fatter, but Khalim saw their secret, so he couldn't let go. The sweet and sour ribs were also in need of new ingredients. The owner's wife said as she licked her lips, very hungry. The husband seemed to be in a hurry. He urged his wife to act quickly so that they could have meat to sell for tonight. Khalim thought he would have to die here. Tears welled up in his eyes. He begged them, but the two of them didn't care at all. Suddenly, they stopped. Their bodies were also trembling and looked behind Khalim. They looked scared. Khalim also turned his back to see what made them like this. But that also made Khalim extremely scared because there were a lot of undead with horrible looks coming towards them. These corpses seemed to be the victims of the owner and the wife of the restaurant. They were coming to take revenge on the owner couple. The wife couldn't stand but fell to the ground, and the husband was so scared that he urinated in his pants. Among the corpses, Khalim saw a man wearing his dark coat. These corpses had no intention of harming Khalim, but only rushed to the restaurant owner and his wife. Without thinking much, Khalim took the opportunity to untie the ropes to escape. When he looked back, Khalim saw that the other couple was surrounded by these corpses. Once again, Khalim escaped from there fast, until he was too tired to run. Then he stopped and thought. Remembering the words of the owner's wife, it turned out that the type of meat used to make ribs was human meat. That made Kaleem disgusted and vomit. Kaleem quickly informed the police. They also went with him to the cemetery to check it out. But strangely, there was no trace there. Kaleem went to the restaurant, but when he arrived, the restaurant was gone. It was a dilapidated house and seemed to have been uninhabited for a long time. It was so strange that Kaleem himself could not explain it. So in the end, was the other couple human or ghost? After that, Kaleem did not dare to go to strange places at night anymore. He also opened a small restaurant, but did not dare to include sweet and sour ribs on his menu. It was a strange story that ran into a few years ago. That time I had to take an urgent leave of absence to visit my mother. My parents lived in the countryside, only I went to the city to work. It took me more than a few hours to drive home from work. My parents were old, so I was worried about their health. After my mother's health improved, I decided to drive back to the city for the night. My parents were worried and wanted me to wait until early the morning to go. But I couldn't wait. I just went back to my hometown to check on my mother's health. I couldn't stay long because I had work to do. I explained that I had taken a quick leave and put aside all unfinished work. I need to go to a meeting early tomorrow morning, so I would be late if I stayed. My parents also understood that my work had many difficulties because working in a big city was not easy, especially for those with not excellent qualifications like me. So they just told me to be careful on the road and said goodbye to me. I drove for a bit more and then came out of the village road. The houses on the street were also sparse. Only trees and dirt roads remained. There were no streetlights. If I didn't drive carefully, I would get into a traffic accident. I didn't remember exactly, but I must have driven more than 10 kilometers and finally got off the dirt road. Ahead was the highway. Follow this highway, keep going straight, and I would reach the city. No need to turn anywhere else. While running, I was a little sleepy when suddenly I panicked because I saw a woman lying in front of me on the side of the road. She seemed to be seriously injured. When the headlights of the car came on, I could see even more clearly. Her clothes were torn. There were bright red bloodstains around her body. It looked like she was a victim of a collision or some pillage. I was wondering if I should stop or not. I pushed the wheel to pull over, but then changed my mind because this part often happened in many looting scenes. I need to be very vigilant. The road from a house to the highway was very rough. Because it was a village road, there were almost no houses around with lights on. While driving, I thought about the girl just now, wondering if she had an accident or not. But I still had work and took care of my elderly parents. I couldn't risk my life. I also apologized to the girl. If she was injured, I wouldn't have been able to help her. But then I thought I should put that aside to focus on driving. Suddenly, I saw something equally strange. So many confusing things happened to me tonight. On the side of the road, a woman was standing and waving to a car to hitchhike. It was strange. Why were there so many women walking alone on this deserted street? I thought about it and ran up to check it out. When the woman saw me, she took another step forward and waved her hand faster to get my attention. I also looked at her as very pretty and gentle, not like the robber type. However, I was still confused. I couldn't let my guard down. I did not stop the car completely, but slowly walked close to the side of the road and looked around carefully. The two sides of the road were completely empty. There were no trees to cover, so it was easy to see that there were no other people besides her, so there certainly wouldn't be bandits hiding to rob me. Seeing that, I felt reassured that I stopped the car completely then called the girl to get in the car. She very happily ran over and thanked me non-stop, making me a little shy. Then she got into the car. I politely greeted her. I also did not forget to ask why she was standing in the middle of the road at late last night, because there were very few houses. She looked at me with a gentle expression and said that she had hitchhiked an acquaintance who came here to catch the bus back to the city to go to school, but was late for the last bus. She had been standing here since afternoon, but no one was willing to help, so she was lucky to meet me. After talking for a while, we were also silent. I also focused on driving. We needed to return to the city early in the morning, so we had to take advantage. At this point, I thought I had run for about an hour, but strangely the surroundings were still familiar to the eyes. I looked out the window to confirm my thoughts. It was still the highway, and the side of the road was a dry field without any trees, exactly like the road where I saw the girl had an accident just now. I clearly remembered that from the place where I met this woman, it only took about an hour to get off the highway and into the residential area. But today was strange. While I was thinking and looking out the window, I had to startle in horror when I turned to the side. Right in front of my eyes was the girl who had the accident earlier. She was still lying on the ground, so it turned out that I was running in a big circle and went back to her place. Too scared, I stepped on the gas and accelerated. I thought I had met a ghost, and that girl was a ghost. At this time, the woman sitting next to me asked me why I didn't help the person in the accident but ran away like that. I didn't say anything, just ran as fast as I could. The woman in my car saw too, so that girl was not a ghost. But no matter how much I tried to run, the scenery around me didn't change. Even though it was very dark, I could still clearly know that I was running in a big circle. At this point, I was so scared. Although I had driven for more than half an hour, the girl who had an accident still appeared in front of my eyes once again. I felt like I was lost in a big maze. Suddenly, a voice came from beside me, but it sounded like it was coming from underground. The voice belonged to the girl sitting next to me. She was blaming me for leaving the victim like that. That voice made me jump. I glanced over and saw the woman's pale face, sharp eyes, and angry expression. That thing scared me. I couldn't look at her anymore. I knew that she was not human anymore, but I still tried to explain that I still had a job and a family. There were countless robberies on the stretch of road, so I had to choose to ignore it. After that, a sudden silence also worried me. I sneaked a glance in the woman's direction to see if it was human or ghost after all. However, before I had time to see her figure clearly, the girl grabbed the steering wheel and held into my ear to force me to turn around. The sudden attack made me lose control of the wheel. The car lost control and I hit the wheel, then ran straight into the side of the road. I also didn't know where the car hit. My head also hit the steering wheel painfully, so when the car stopped, I could only rub my head without having time to look around. After waking up, I looked over to the passenger seat, but the girl from earlier was gone. I was sure I had met a ghost. I got out of the car to check my surroundings, to see how far I had run. This road was too dark. I couldn't see anything around clearly. I could only follow the light from the car to go. But I hadn't taken 10 steps before I had to stop. Cold sweat poured out like water because of what I saw before my eyes. A little more than 3 meters from my car was a deep precipice, dark below with no bottom visible. If the car did not stop in time, it could have plunged straight into the bottom of the cliff. That thought made my limbs so weak that I couldn't even stand. I fell to the ground and my body kept shaking from fear. I sat there for a long time to regain my sanity. Then I got into the car again and kept going. I thought the other woman scared me because she wanted to save the girl in distress. Just like that, I continued to run. The road gradually became familiar. I knew what I was about to see. As I expected, the girl was injured in the accident once again appeared on the side of the road in front of my eyes, the same as before. She was still lying like that. This time, I decided to stop the car and check her out. I would have guessed that the woman in the car and the girl in the accident were the same people. She was dead, so she appeared to make me help her body. At this point, I didn't think much of it. I turned the girl over and called her to see if there was any reaction or not. But surprisingly, when I saw her face, it wasn't the woman in my car. They were two different people. After checking, she was still breathing but very weak, so I rushed her to the hospital. The road went very smoothly, no more strange happenings. Feeling guilty the next day, I bought some fruit to visit her. The girl said she had a traffic accident and was robbed. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have survived. But I was very guilty because I had no intention of helping her in the first place. As for that strange woman, I didn't know why she did that. A long time ago, I told my close friend about a camping trip I went on a few years ago. During that camping trip, I encountered a strange thing. That also was the last time I saw my travel companion. To this day, I still couldn't contact him. A friend in my group was also curious to ask if I had tried contacting that friend again. But the truth was that I went to his house in a high-class apartment block down the street, but still no more news. When my close friend heard about it, he was skeptical and didn't know what was wrong, so he could only reassure me to go to the police to see if he could help. When I heard that, I sighed because I did everything but could not. By the way, I also told my close friend about that strange camping trip of mine. At the time, I had an appointment with that companion, my college classmate and another female friend, to join a mountain climbing camp organized by ourselves. We set off very early because we had to catch the bus to a remote suburb. This place was famous for its high hills and dense forests full of mysteries. When we got there, we were so excited, everyone was anxious about the upcoming climb trip. After arriving, we decided to rent a small room near the hill to rest because it was also late. That night we slept at the motel and only wanted all of our energy to spend the next day's expedition. Before we started, we also heard horror stories that happened in the same forest. But with our stubborn nature, we decided to ignore the rumors and head straight for the hill as planned. After going into the forest for a long time, we could not see another turn. I was afraid that we would all get lost if we continued further inside. So we all discussed whether we should stop and pitch a tent here for fear that the deeper we go, the more dangerous we would be. At first we were hesitant, but because there was a woman in the group, we also decided to set up to our camp right at the edge of the forest, near the road going down the hill to ensure safety. During our lunch break, the whole team ate and talked about what we needed to do that evening. When it was dark, we decided to go deeper to facilitate exploration but still keep a safe enough distance to run down the hill when something went wrong. We were halfway down the street when this female friend said she needed to go to pee and told us to stand here and wait for her for a moment. I advised her not to go too far and then talked with the other companion and discussed with them whether to choose this flat place to pitch a camp or not. I was afraid that if we went deep into the forest, there would be no phone signal. After agreeing, we decided to set up camp here. When the female friend returned, we had finished everything. The female friend who saw us from afar rushed over and said that she had encountered a perverted and strange man that surprised the two of us. The female friend said that when she went to pee, she accidentally caught this man standing behind a tree and following her. At first, my companion seemed to not believe her. He thought no one would pass by in such a deep forest. But the female friend kept insisting that a man was following her and pointed towards the deep forest. Then she took us to the place where she saw the man, but when I got there, I only saw a big cliff. At the time, my travel companion thought it would most likely be an interesting experience, so he suggested camping in front of this rock to see who the mysterious man was. But as soon as the sentence ended, a man in his 40s appeared from nowhere with a strange gesture. This man looked at us with a sharp eye and asked who we were and where we came from, and kept saying we had to get out of this forest quickly. Then the female friend in the group confirmed and concluded that this was the man she had met earlier. The strange man heard what we said as an insult to his honor and became very upset. We all blamed him at that time, thinking he was a pervert. My companion always scolded and threatened not to let him come near our camp. After that, we decided to go back to our camp and not care about the strange man anymore. That night we sat in our camp. We casually ate and talked happily. After eating and drinking, we discussed that we would take turns guarding between two men, and my companion volunteered to be the first on duty, and I would go to the camp to sleep first. The other female friend, seeing this, was also embarrassed and said that she would go to the other camp to sleep. After that, we split up, one camp per person, and began to rest. The whole forest sank into the inherent stillness and silence as if nothing had happened. But after sleeping for a while, the female friend in the camp suddenly felt uneasy, so she softly called out to my friend. After receiving no response, she pulled the camp down to check, but no one was outside. At this time, the female friend felt worried, so she ventured out. She went out alone to look for her friend in bewilderment. She followed the old road to see where the other friend was. After a while of looking for him with no result, this female friend returned to the original cliff where we came from. By chance, she met the strange older man from earlier. Knowing she was looking for a friend, the older man turned his face back, and as if to say that her friend was inside the cave. So she immediately ran straight into the cave, calling out the name of her friend. But once inside, she saw no trace of her friend, nor heard any reply. When she was about to turn back, she saw a small light at the end of the road. Curious, she walked over and discovered a mausoleum. There was a shadowy figure there. It was none other than the friend in the group. She didn't know when he came here, but he was busy looking for something. The female friend went to ask questions out of curiosity, only to find out that this male friend accidentally found an ancient tomb. The owner of this tomb must be a person of royal background, because there were many precious gold and silver jewels around her body. But strangely, no one knew who this woman was and when she died. The parched flesh of her face still showed no sign of decay. Both of them were very excited when they saw a lot of expensive treasure. Together, each person took away all the possessions in the tomb and put them in their backpack. After taking it, the two quickly pulled each other out. As soon as they came out of the cave, there was strange laughter inside that attracted the attention of both of them. The female friend thought it might be the strange older man's voice. While the two were bewildered, from inside a figure staggered over. When the strange figure came outside, the young couple trembled, not daring to say a word. The strange man from earlier suddenly changed, becoming a twisted corpse with his head turned back. The brave male friend took his flashlight and threw it at the strange man. But the man looked at both of them with bloodshot eyes. His face was as calm as he knew it all. Then he slashed with his hand, causing the flashlight to break in two, then chased after the young couple with an axe. Because they were too scared, the two found a nearby rock cave and went inside to escape. But when they thought they were safe, there were strange sounds behind them. Because the male friend wanted to protect the other female friend, he immediately signaled the female friend to run away just as the man with the axe appeared. He stood close behind the male friend, then raised his sharp iron axe and flashed a devilish smile. The male friend was scared to run away but was held by this man. Then the man used an axe and hit the male friend hard. The female friend witnessed the scene and ran away in panic. When she was running close to the campsite, she accidentally ran into me. As soon as she met me, the female friend hugged her face and burst into tears. After hearing the story, I asked the female friend to turn back to the camp, and I called the police about the incident. In the camp, the female friend was constantly worried about the male friend because he was attacked by the strange older man. After a while, the police showed up, but when I brought the police to the scene of the incident, there was no appearance of a cave. The other man was also found later, but he said it was my friend who attacked him and fainted. To my surprise, this man added that after being beaten by my friend, he no longer knew anything. After telling the story, my friend immediately turned to ask the story. I told him that the male friend had disappeared, but the strange story here did not stop there. This strange man also said that he was trapped in that forest for a very long time until we showed up and informed the police. It happened to me a few years ago. I was a police officer working at the city police station, and the department I worked in was receiving reports from residents. That night, about midnight, I was alone on patrol when the sound of the door opening with a bell drew my attention. When I looked out the window, I noticed a woman walking from outside. She was completely silent as she walked inside and looked at me. Her stomach was big as if she was pregnant. I was also curious why a pregnant woman was here at this hour. I remember the woman's face being very pale, and she constantly hugged her stomach. It seemed that she was about to give birth soon, and she looked at me when I asked her a question. When I noticed she was still silent, I inquired again. She just moved closer to my desk. Suddenly she became agitated and stated that her son had gone missing during the night. Unable to hear the end of the story, but seeing the woman too excited to scream, I advised her to remain calm and recount the incident. She explained that she lived in room 603 of an apartment in the heart of the city, because she had divorced for a long time and only lived there with her son. Tonight, she and her son went to bed earlier than usual because her son didn't feel good. She quickly fell asleep because of tired after a hard day working. After that, she didn't remember how long she slept, but she needed to use the restroom, so she woke up. Before stepping down the bed, she looked inside to see how her son was, and unexpectedly, he wasn't there. But because it was an apartment, she was on the 6th floor, so it was relatively safe. She didn't think a child could go inside. He might have been just playing in the living room, so she walked towards the living room to find him. But when she looked around the living room and the kitchen, she discovered that her son was nowhere to be found. She began to panic, but she tried to calm down and continued to look everywhere in the house, including the toilet, but everything was empty. In a panic, she ran out the house's doors and double-checked, only to find that they were all locked from inside, preventing her son from leaving the house. She felt like her boy had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace, indicating that this wasn't a typical kidnapping case. After hearing everything, I was upset because it was clear that her story was somewhat unreasonable and her mind wasn't in any good state, so I simply asked the address correctly and recorded it, saying that I would send people to check. But she became extremely aggressive. Her face changed. She held at me and demanded that I investigate immediately, otherwise she would die. I had not yet answered her when the phone rang. I asked her to let me pick up the call, then I would continue to assist her. She didn't say anything, remained completely silent while I listened to the phone. It was another case, and I meticulously recorded everything. After finishing the call, I continued to speak with the woman. I wanted to know more about his age as well as the circumstances of his son before he was lost. but now the space was eerily silent. The woman had vanished. I sat down and crested for a long time, because I remembered that if anyone walked in, the door would also emit noise and the alarm, but clearly I didn't hear any sound earlier. The story also passed nearly a week later, and I didn't hear anything about it, so I didn't pay much attention until one day, when I was ordered to go to the chief's department. So before starting to work, I presented an order. The chief stated that after receiving reports of residents living in the city where there was very strong stench coming from an apartment of their building, they wanted police to investigate. I was appointed with a colleague and I was just a supporter, so I asked him about the exact address where the problem occurred. He stated that it was an apartment in the center and that the room was reported was room 603. He also stated that he hoped to have no murders committed. After hearing it, I began to wonder, because this address sounded very familiar. It seemed that I had heard it somewhere. All the way to the site, I was constantly thinking about it. After parking, the two residents who reported the case were about to wait for us. They resumed their narration. They were neighbors on the same floor as room 603. About a week ago, the apartment began to spread a very strong stench, so they had to call the cops. After a while of talking, they began to lead us to the apartment. On the way, my colleague suddenly reminded me of the woman who had appeared in the report a week ago. It appeared that she was also staying in this building. As soon as he mentioned it, I recalled everything. In fact, the woman claimed that she was in apartment 603 of this building. That worried me because I ignored her words, and when we stood in front of the door, we smelled a horrible stench. We obtained the key from the building's management, so we could open the door directly. The dark room was crawling with flies. The smell was caused by a corpse lying on the floor, which was reported by neighbors. I was terrified as I looked at it. My body was shocked and turned cold. The corpse had decomposed a lot and the body was full of bugs, but looking at the clothes, they were exactly the same as what the woman wore that day. On the ground was a pool of blood mixed with solutions flowing from the body. Maggots were everywhere. The scene was extremely terrifying. My colleagues and I were stunned by the scene before our eyes. I began to have many thoughts. I was afraid that this was related to the woman's case that happened the other night while I didn't care what it was. The case was so serious that it should have been transferred to the criminal department, but I didn't listen to the information about that case until a few days later. But I couldn't sleep because I always regretted that I considered it seriously when the victim came to the report, so I decided to meet with the chief to tell the truth. I confessed everything to him, that a week ago the victim came to see me and report about the missing son, but I didn't investigate it. Listening to my report, the chief was shocked, because according to the examination the woman died at least 2 weeks ago and there couldn't have been a chance for her to come to report a week ago. I was so confused after hearing it that my entire body lost strength. Obviously that woman the other night was the body we found and I would most likely be hallucinating. The chief also reassured me that the case had nothing to do with me because she had been unable to go to a report a week ago, so it could have been a mistake. I didn't understand what was going on, but I decided to go see a friend in the criminal department to ask about the situation of the case. I just wanted to know the status of the body and whether or not the murderer had been found. When he heard the story I told, my friend immediately pulled me away because according to a forensic examination, she died in a horrible and cruel manner. According to my friend, the killer tended to take her unborn child and that child still remained in her stomach. Listening to this, I was even more unexpected. How could you take a child from the stomach of the mother? Unless you slash her stomach to do so. But when I saw the body, her body was still completely intact. What I heard next was extremely evil. It was the murderer who ripped her genitals up to the middle of her stomach in order to extract her child. Because of the heinous nature of the crime, My face turned green and the perpetrator appeared to be a horrible pervert. After that, my friend said goodbye to me so that he could continue his work. I was still so shocked that I couldn't move. Obviously, that night her soul presented to report the case of someone who kidnapped her child, and that image lingered in my mind for the rest of my life. Not long after that, the murderer was apprehended. He was a friend of hers. He had an incurable disease. Then he heard a shaman say that eating an 8-month fetus would cure the sickness, so he did it when he knew the woman was alone. Following that, his crime was sentenced to life imprisonment without mercy. My husband and I recently married, and we both decided to buy a small apartment. After many options, we finally found a suitable place, and that day we moved our furniture to the new place. As we passed through the gate, a security guard checked our resident card and then directed us to where we could park our car. There was parking on the ground and underground as well. However, parking on the ground required an additional fee, so we decided to dash down to the basement, and the security guard also carefully reminded us to follow the directions when we drive. At the time, I was surprised because the guard appeared to be very strict, but my husband thought it was a good thing because it would ensure security and make it safer to live here. After that, my husband followed the direction to go down to the parking basement. Because we had just moved in here, he was a little confused, but everything had direction boards on the way. There were also arrows pointing the way, and as we got closer to the location, I noticed something strange. I immediately showed my husband what I saw, and he was astounded also. My husband thought it was the first time he had seen such a strange thing in a parking lot, so we both decided to find a parking lot then go check it out. We were curious. As soon as we finished parking, we walked there. It was a small temple similar to what I saw on TV that looked like a shrine or to cover a grave. My husband believed that there was no way they built such a shrine in the basement to worship gods, so this was unquestionably a place to worship the devil. The atmosphere in the basement was dark and cold. Seeing the strange thing made me nervous, and his joke made me even more worried. My husband used to not believe in ghosts. Seeing me scared made him want to tease me even more, so he planned to climb in there to prove there was nothing there.
Hey!
A voice from behind us called out, and it turned out to be an elderly security guard who appeared irritated when we attempted to enter the temple. He knew we had just moved here and didn't know anything. He said, "There was a sign saying no entry. Why do you keep on going on purpose?" Looking closely, we noticed a board on the wall that states no entry for any reason. That piqued my husband's interest even more. He thought it was strange that this temple was built here but not open to the public. When the old security guard noticed that we didn't know anything, he tried to reveal to us something, but before he could say anything, the radio called him to go somewhere, so we quickly turned away. He reminded us not to violate the law or the signs here arbitrarily before he left. It was also recommended to use the elevator on the right if we wanted to be safe, and to avoid using the elevator on the left if there was no urgent need. We started moving our belongings to the new house, and my husband completely ignored the security guard's instructions, leaving me feel uneasy. I also reminded my husband to do as the guard said, so we pressed and waited for the elevator on the right. But it didn't come down for quite a long time. Because my husband was impatient, he suggested using the one on the left. There was no sign of a broken elevator or anything else. I didn't want to go inside, but my husband insisted because the one on the left descended quickly without delay. I followed my husband into the elevator. Even though I remembered the security guard's words, the basement was so cold that I didn't dare to stand here alone. The elevator was in perfect working order, but the frightening thing was that there was a terrifying looking charm stuck on the top of the elevator, which I showed my husband. But he turned around and mocked me for being a coward, thinking it was just a peace charm or something thrown on at random. Nothing frightening. After that, nothing happened. We moved into the new house, and because it is a high-class apartment, the furniture was available. Just come and stay. I quickly became familiar with my new neighbors, and when I took my dog for a walk in the park, I also spoke with a lady who lived in the same building. After greetings, I inquired about the temple in the parking basement, which always seemed gloomy and cold to me. The auntie's face returned to solemnity, and her voice became quieter, as if she was afraid someone would overhear her. She claimed that while building and digging, workers discovered a grave in which many bodies were buried, with a large number of white skeletons, both old and young. They also invited a shaman to come bless the land at this time, and the ceremony was big, with many offerings. Nothing happened during the construction because the location of the grave was converted into a parking basement. But the strange thing was that accidents occurred frequently at the bend near the grave after the construction was completed. The car would lose its brakes and crash into the wall. Some people would survive but suffer serious injuries, while others would perish. That day, the lucky survivor was attempting to crawl out of his overturned car when he noticed something very frightening. Countless numbers of ghosts floated in front of him, staring at him with terrifying expressions. He thought that he might have been dizzy and hallucinating as a result of the accident. But they were still there. Their faces were white, their eyes were missing irises. Some had broken heads, and others were missing arms and legs. I was surprised and alarmed after hearing it, and I continued to question her about how the building handled it. She said after that they invited a well-known Feng Shui master to come over to check the site, and they built that small temple to suppress evil spirits. Fortunately, no further accidents occurred again at that site after the construction was completed. Knowing the backstory, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and my heart skipped a beat every time I passed by the temple. But because nothing happened, I tried to dismiss the story and forget about it. My husband and I were so excited to be invited to a friend's camping trip that we left very early that day. Because my husband drank a lot, we came back quite late at night, and I was the one who drove, and we were still talking about our outing from the day. When we arrived, because my husband was too drunk, when he got out of the car, he went straight to the other temple. I stopped him, but he didn't care. He said he wanted to take pictures with the temple, so he went over and climbed over the barrier to get in. I tried to catch up with him, but couldn't. He left his camera on the fence and walked alone into the temple center, asking me to photograph him. He posed and waited for me to take pictures no matter how many times I told him not to. I knew my husband was drunk, so I couldn't advise you. That was why I quickly took a picture of him so he could get out of the temple as soon as possible. And he climbed out right after that. I helped him home because I hadn't seen anything had happened, and I didn't think about that temple anymore. We went to a photo studio near our house a few days later, when we had time to develop the pictures we took on the day of the camping trip. There were more than 30 pictures, and we enjoyed watching them. It was a lot of fun to go out that day. But it wasn't until we got to the last photo that our faces began to pale with fear. That was the picture my husband took at the small temple in the basement. It was very clear in the picture. Some ghosts standing in that temple, looking at the camera just next to him. We decided to spend more money to park the car on the ground from then on. The story took place on July 21, 2010 in Taiwan in a commercial and residential building known as Zushi Tiansha. The fifth floor of this building was a nursing house for mildly mentally ill patients, while the remaining floors were apartments and offices. 7 days ago, an elderly woman named Lee, who was being treated in the hospital on the 5th floor, went missing, and her family searched for days but couldn't find her. That afternoon, an elderly man was returning to his apartment on the 7th floor of the Zushi Tiansha building. Because he had only one daughter and was married, the elderly man lived alone on the 7th floor. When the elevator doors opened, the old man entered to go upstairs as usual, but he discovered that it was occupied by an elderly woman, but she didn't exit. The old man didn't think much of it, despite the fact that it was strange. She became even more bizarre after entering because she did not press to select any floor. It could have been a confused woman or a mental patient on the 5th floor. The old man mused to himself as he pressed a button to the 7th floor where he wanted to go. The elderly man casually inquired of the woman, "What floor do you want to go to?" The woman replied in hushed tones that she wanted to go to the 6th floor. The old man easily assisted her in pressing the 6th floor. He assumed she was confused and had forgotten to press. As the elevator rose, the old woman said nothing and did not respond either, despite the fact that the old man asked a few questions. "The 6th floor has been vacant for many years and has been sold for many years. Are you the one who bought it?" Because the old man suspected she was a psycho, he paid no attention to her anymore. After a while, the elevator took the two of them to the 6th floor as the old woman had requested. However, the woman did not approach the elevator door, indicating that she did not intend to exit the elevator. The man returned to remind her not to miss the elevator again. "Aren't you going to the 6th floor? There, you have it." But this time the old man was taken aback. Something was wrong here. Behind him turned out to be empty and the woman vanished without a trace. There was only the old man in the elevator. Did she just vanish like this? This time terrified the old man. He had no idea what he was in for. Could it be that what he saw just now was a ghost? Just as the old man was becoming perplexed, the elevator door behind him slowly opened, indicating that something was abnormal. The old man looked back instinctively. He was also on the lookout for any unexpected situations that might arise. And the old man saw a dark figure rushing towards him. He had no idea what was going on. But as soon as he saw the figure clearly, he was terrified. He couldn't believe what he was seeing in front of him. It was an old woman with a hideous face, her skin rotting and revealing a grey color, and her body emitting a strong stench. The old lady with white eyes gaped at him with a cynical look. Her body was poured directly onto him, which terrified him. The old man collapsed to the ground in terror, and the woman also overpowered him. He was completely taken aback by what was happening. Wasn't this the old lady who just asked him to select the elevator button on the 6th floor? At the time, his reaction was perplexing. The old man had almost exhausted his remaining strength. From the other corner, the old woman's body was lying there, and he was leaning against the elevator's corner. He was terrified. But seeing the old woman's body lying on the ground, his legs were terrified and he couldn't stand up. However, he discovered another more terrible truth at this time. Because the old woman's body blocked the elevator door, preventing the elevator from running. With trembling hands, he quickly took out his cell phone and dialed his daughter's number, pleading for assistance. However, the signal in the elevator was very poor. He didn't remember how many times he called, but it appeared that he was unable to obtain the signal. His daughter worked as an office worker for a foreign invested company at the time. She knew her father was in distress after receiving the call, so she immediately dialed 911. 20 minutes later, the police arrived at the Tiansha building where the old man was trapped and were attempting to help him. However, when the police and rescue teams arrived, they saw the situation at the scene and it was helpless because so many things were intertwined. The cops used the old man's daughter's cell phone to contact him and wanted to save him as soon as possible, and there was only one way to do so. That was drag the decomposing old woman into the elevator and restart the elevator. The old man shivered when he realized he'd have to pull that horrible corpse by himself, but there was no other option. He thought the ghost of the old woman was beside him, so he just had to move this horrible rotting corpse? He had no idea what to do. However, he was unable to move or leave. He didn't want to spend another second with this body because it was getting dark. When the night came, if he was still present to keep this corpse and remain this closed elevator, a ghost might appear at any time. With this in mind, the elderly man closed his eyes and dragged the body into the elevator. The elevator finally started running after dragging the body into the elevator room, but as soon as the door closed, this terrible old man and woman were trapped in the cramped elevator. Still haunted by the sticky sensation of the old woman's rotting corpse, he looked around and found it deafeningly quiet. The entire world seemed to have vanished, leaving only the old man to guard the terrifying corpse. The elevator went down for a few minutes, and the old man felt like he'd been there for a century. Finally, the elevator descended to the first floor where the old woman's body was being handled by the rescue team below, and the old man collapsed before stepping out of the elevator with the assistance of his daughter. An investigation revealed that the old woman's body was identical to Mr. Lee's, who went missing 7 days ago. The police obtained surveillance footage of the entire building and revealed information about the incident. On July 14, Miss Lee, an elderly woman receiving care at a nursing home on the 5th floor, ghostly pressed a button to enter the elevator on the 6th floor. Miss Lee stepped out of the elevator after it reached the 6th floor in case no one noticed. The 6th floor was formerly a dojo, abandoned for unknown reasons for many years, recently sold to a new owner, who didn't know why, never used the place, so it remained empty. However, because the owner was concerned about other people entering, he welded a small iron cage to the elevator position. Miss Lee discovered that the elevator door at the back was closed after exiting the elevator. Because of the gap in this cage, she couldn't squat or lie down. She could only stand like this, and no one noticed she was trapped there. Following the autopsy, she died of dehydration. Perhaps the old man's discovery of her body was proof that the spirit can guide the way. As we age, our appearances as well as bodies lose vitality, but many people refuse to admit it. The following story occurred in a small northern city, and the main character was a widow named Sun. Despite the fact that her husband died at a young age, Sun remained very strong. She had worked very hard to support her family and always wished to see her 2 children grow up. However, Sun was very lonely as her 2 children married and had their own families. They were also busy with work and had little time to visit her. They also rarely brought their children to visit her, though they frequently sent her money, which couldn't compensate for the void in her heart. Sun had also tried playing cards and traveling with a few close friends like everyone else, but this wasn't what she truly desired. Sun went out shopping today. She was walking down the street when she noticed a very familiar young man walking in front of her. She took a quick step forward and turned her head to look, finally catching a glimpse of his face. This person resembled her late husband. She couldn't help but be curious when she saw the strange man who looked exactly like her husband, so she quietly followed behind him. Sun inquired of a student standing in front of the school gate whether he attended the same school as the other young man.
"Yes, that's Kai, the best student in our school."
When Sun knew that the young man's name was Kai, she fell in love with him at first sight. However, as Kai became aware of Sun's tracking, he decided to deviate from his usual daily route. When Sun no longer saw Kai walking down those streets, she knew he'd realized he was being followed. Sun sighed every time she looked in the mirror at her wrinkled face, convinced that she was aging rapidly. Sun brought a sad mood that day. After eating, she went for a walk, unexpectedly bumping into Kai, making her feel a little embarrassed. Sun walked away quickly, thinking of the meeting just now. Her heart felt both happy and sad, mixed and intertwined. San ran fast for a long distance because she was still embarrassed. Kai was nowhere to be found when she turned her head to look back. San was still looking in his direction with a disappointed expression on her face when she turned her head and noticed a strange man standing right next to her. As if he could see through San's mind, this man asked her if she wanted to enter an official relationship with a person she secretly loved. When she noticed the strange man saying strange things, she tried to walk away, but was stopped by him. He wanted her to listen to what he was about to say. The man then took out a small bottle and handed it to San, explaining that it was called youth glue, and that simply applying it to her face would restore her youthful appearance. As if by magic, San subconsciously took the small bottle of youth glue. But then San appeared to awaken. She reacted as if she wanted to refuse, but the man had vanished. San wanted to throw away the strange little bottle, but she reconsidered. If this thing could truly restore her youth, she would give it a shot. When she got home, she anxiously took out the bottle, which contained a substance that was no different from regular glue except for the stamp written youth glue. She felt cheated because she had never heard of anyone applying glue to their faces and making them look younger, like an 18-year-old girl. But when she thought of Kai, then of that mysterious man, it was as if she were possessed by a demon, and a voice in her head urged her to use this glue as soon as possible. San couldn't resist the temptation and applied glue to her face before going to bed. She used up the entire bottle of glue. San felt cool and relaxed after applying it to her face, and she promptly fell asleep. It was only early in the morning. San couldn't wait to get up and look in the mirror as soon as she opened her eyes. San was taken aback when she saw herself in the mirror for the first time. She became younger and had regained her youthful appearance.
Wow!
San happily went out after changing clothes, looking forward to meeting Kai to express her feelings, and everyone on the street looked at her admiringly, making her very happy. There had even been some young men who had asked for San's contact information, but she rejected them all. So she went to Kai's school every day to meet him. She successfully caught Kai's attention, and they gradually got to know each other. Then she and Kai became lovers, as she wished for. Kai's appearance reminded her of her late husband every single time they met. Today, the two of them were out on the street shopping when her phone rang. San took it out and saw that it was her son calling. San hurriedly ran to another location to answer the phone, and Kai noticed that she appeared to be hiding something. After San hung up the phone, Kai inquired about the conversation. When San looked at Kai, she realized she couldn't tell the truth, so she devised a way to avoid it. Though everything would be alright, but recently, her son and daughter had been calling Sun alternately, making it difficult for her to explain to Kai each time. It turned out that because her appearance had changed, she didn't dare to meet her children, so she always made excuses not to see them. Her children were worried about their mother but were busy with work, so they could only care for her by calling her via phone. However, Kai was suspicious due to recent frequent phone calls. But every time Sun tried to avoid his question, Kai clearly didn't believe it any longer. To assuage his suspicions, she intercepted her children's phone calls whenever she left the house and spent money hiring young people to perform as her friends. But it didn't last long. After 3 months, the wrinkles on her face reappeared, and one day when she woke up, she had the appearance of an elderly woman. Kai was now calling her frequently, but Sun was afraid to respond, not knowing how to face him. Sun walked around the streets and alleys every day, hoping to catch a glimpse of her lover from afar. Just as she was about to give up, the mysterious man who had given her a bottle of youth glue appeared. She shed tears of joy when she saw that man, but the mysterious man did not take the youth glue out to give it to her, but instead made a request to her. Sun paused when he told her she had to trade her life. Sun was told to think twice about it after the mysterious man explained it to her. Sun thought about Kai and her husband who died young, so she was unconcerned about the consequences and accepted to trade youth glue from the man. She then reverted to her youthful beauty and returned to Kai once more. The two then rekindled their beautiful love, dreaming of a sweet home. But it didn't take long. This time the glue's effect lasted only a month before it faded, even though she looked much older than the last time. When she looked at her old face, she realized that the mysterious man meant if she kept using the glue, she would really die one day. Finally, Sun, unable to resist the desire of youth and love, set out to find the mysterious man. But before that, when she happened to run into Kai on the street, her elderly appearance clearly failed to make Kai recognize that the old woman in front of him was his lover. Sun's heart was broken as she looked at Kai's back. This time, Sun could easily meet the mysterious man. He continued to give Sun a new youth glue bottle after Sun determined that she would continue to use glue. However, the glue's effect lasted only a week this time. Sun finished from Kai for the third time a week later. Kai couldn't find her no matter how hard he tried. It wasn't until his son returned home that he discovered she had died. Sun's death appearance was strange. Her entire body transformed into a mummy, and she opened her mouth as if calling for something. Which would you choose? Health, youth, love, life, or family?